Hey everybody, welcome to today's Wednesday workshop. We're here live with you inside of LinkedIn, or you might be catching it right now on our YouTube channel, but welcome to this week's Wednesday workshop where we're continuing the conversation about the permissive leadership dysfunction and how it plays out in organizational life. For those of you who are joining me for the first time, my name is Dranitsaris-Hilliard, and I'm an expert in organizational development and behavioral change. And in these workshops, we bring to you information, powerful information about really understanding some of the core dysfunctions behind leadership, how those dysfunctions show up, why they are there, and most importantly, what it is that we can do to help people, our leaders, ourselves, to really be able to power through and power past these dysfunctions. And we have been talking in the last couple of weeks about the permissive leadership dysfunction. Of course, this is a form of narcissistic leadership dysfunction. It just comes out and gets demonstrated out in a different way that we don't often associate with narcissism. But the fact is, it is a self-protective defense strategy that allows the leader to stay within his or her comfort zone, to do what protects their image of themselves, and to, again, keep moving along as a leader without actually having to work through their own development from a leadership perspective. Today, we're talking about upward delegation. We're talking about that talent of employees, because we do talk about employees as being key to the role around upward delegation, but that where we have situations where employees are constantly delegating the work back up to their manager and getting their manager to get involved in the work, even though the employee really is equipped to be able to do it themselves, or we really want that employee to develop that ability, but instead they move towards upward delegation. I remember a couple years ago having this conversation in one of our Leadership Foundation programs with one of the participants, and I was explaining this whole notion about upward delegation. And one of the leaders very profoundly said, "There's a name to that? My staff do that to me all the time," right? And we know we are struggling with upward delegation when we feel like we are doing more of our employees' work than they are, right? Have you ever had that experience? Or where we stop delegating to our employees so as either not to meet their groans of displeasure or not having to work through that process of them just trying to pass it back to us and us having to stay the course with it. If so, if these are some of the things that you can relate to, again, it's likely that you've been so permissive and so supportive of your employees that you've actually sent the message through to them that it's okay based on your behavior that you work for them rather than they work for you. Upward delegation, we've seen it over and over in organizations. It's on the rise because leaders have this notion that in order to be a good or a great leader, they have to take on their employees' work. They have to make it easier for their employees. They have to make sure that their employees are not struggling, or that if their employees are coming to them saying, "I'm struggling, I'm overwhelmed, or I just don't even like doing it," that they're just not taking that back on. And so the thing is that we're trying to be good as leaders, and we do quote unquote, while we're trying to be good as leaders, and when we're stuck in that permissive dysfunction, we actually end up becoming ineffective. And so it's really important when you think about this notion of upward delegation and permissive leadership is to really look at our own agenda, okay? When we allow upward delegation, what is it doing for us? Why is it that we are moving into that place of allowing it and tolerating it? Well, typically what leaders find when they start to do some exploration around this notion is that we are helping to make it easy on ourselves. Essentially, by allowing upward delegation, we make our own lives easier. And we are abdicating responsibility in the process of developing our employees, making sure our employees are learning, that they're building their mastery around these things. Every time we take the work back on, we are making it easier, faster, more efficient for ourselves because we're not having to stay with our employees and really work them through their development. So we're choosing in that moment personal efficiency, But at the same time, we're contributing to some longer term organizational dysfunction. So that's why it's so important to understand the notion of upward delegation and why it happens, how it happens, and what it is that we need to start thinking about and how we need to connect it up to the whole notion of permissive leadership, that it is just one of the patterns of behavior that comes hand in hand when we're practicing permissive leadership. And also remembering too, and we'll talk a little bit about this, that it's that underlying fear of exercising our own authority that is the root cause of that permissive leadership behavior. So this tolerance of upward delegation is simply one of the symptoms that we experience in organizations around permissive leadership, right? So you probably had your own situations. You've probably seen your own examples of this where, and maybe you've even done it to your own manager where you've delegated something back up. I have a client right now where we're really working to try and move the delegation down into that tier below. And they've given them really broad strokes. They've, given them broad direction. And essentially the group hasn't moved forward on any of these things that they've been tasked with doing. And so guess what's happening is the leaders are now having to step in and take it on. And so we're trying to help them resist the impulse of taking it over and doing themselves, as opposed to developing a different process where that upward delegation ceases to happen anymore. Because again, when we're trying to develop our people, when we're trying to mature our organization, especially during periods of growth, breaking that cycle of upward delegation is very, very important. Now, we always talk about dysfunctional leadership behavior and why it matters if there's dysfunctional behavior, if there's permissive leadership. Always bottom line it, which is it does cost the organization. And the kinds of symptoms that we see in organizations are the things that they complain about where they really notice the cost is differences in standards, a failure to comply, costs that are involved around quality or correction of things, leaders not having the time to focus up and out on their business because they are so pulled in by their employees through that process of upward delegation. All of that costs us in terms of the business, whether it's dollars out or even just in terms of opportunity cost. But upward delegation in particular, it negatively impacts leaders and it negatively impacts employees. And this is really important to understand. The employees may think in the short term it's to their benefit because, hey, I got my boss to do this. I don't want to do it. My boss is doing it for me instead. But their development suffers. And then organizationally, our employees are not ready when we need them to be ready to grow and expand in their roles and in their contribution. But it also negatively impacts leaders because we get so busy taking on all of that work in addition to our own and not staying in that process of delegation and accountability with our people that, again, we get burdened, we get burnt out, and we're not able to do all of the things that we might need to be getting to in terms of the priorities of the business. And so things fall off of our list, right? Or we don't have the time and attention for our people that ensure we secure their retention. So there is, again, all kinds of implications when this upward delegation is happening in organizations. What's most important, and the message that we always talk to leaders about, is that you have to stop working for your employees, okay? And we have to stop working harder than our employees on our employees' jobs. And I can even translate this into my own personal life with my kids and their schoolwork, is like, as a parent, always recognizing where I want to help them so they're not struggling, but if I help them too much or I do it for them, then they're missing out on that critical development. And we have to take responsibility as leaders, as parents, for that development. We have to allow our employees to struggle. We have to allow our children to struggle in the context of parenting. And that's how development happens. And when we take away that opportunity for them to struggle with something, we're also removing that opportunity for development. So we want you to learn some skills today around setting boundaries, the importance of, for us as leaders, to have those boundaries and to keep that delegation flowing downward. Doesn't mean we're not involved, doesn't mean we're not overseeing, but we don't want the work to be coming back up, okay? We can support, we can help, but it's really understanding that place at which we are crossing the line and allowing for that upward delegation to happen. Really starting to understand and assess the impact on you, right? So if you recognize that this is going on for you as a leader and in your team. What is the impact for you? What is it keeping you from? How is it affecting your ability to be as effective as possible as a leader? And we want to always say, when we look at permissive leadership and the dysfunction and the symptoms of the dysfunction that emerge, it is about building new competencies as leaders, right? Building up that bench strength, which is a really key part of delegation, and increasing productivity. I have a client that I've worked with for many years, and one of the biggest complaints of one of the tiers of leadership is the one above has not delegated. They have not done anything from a development perspective. And so they, in fact, this is a little bit backwards, where they have insisted that they maintain so much control and around everything, all the decision makings, and everything has to go through them, that they've actually failed to build the bench strength for a slightly different reason. But interestingly enough, that tier below really struggles that because they haven't been delegated, down, what they tend to do is when their employees start to delegate up to them, they take it back on, because that's the model that their bosses established for them, is that you don't delegate that authority, you don't delegate that tasks, and then the organization gets stuck in this place because the leaders aren't ready to take on more, to lead differently, or to grow into the next level of their role, and they don't have the bench strength below them in order to be able to do that either. And so again, we have this ripple effect from a productivity and an effectiveness perspective. So what do we mean by upward delegation? So let's talk a little bit about it. So this essentially, and I think it's important because we want to understand the distinction between upward delegation and when we as a leader are being supportive and we're doing that coaching, effective coaching of the performance development of our people. Upward delegating is essentially when an employee brings a problem, an issue, a task to the manager. And it's bringing it to the manager to, can you solve it for me? Can you fix it? Can you finish it? I didn't know what to do with this, so I'm giving it back to you. And they're doing this despite the fact that they have everything they need to solve it for themselves, to do it for themselves, to bring it across that finish line. And it's essentially, in a sense, done in an effort to get the manager to do what has been tasked to that employee under those particular, in that particular situation. But it's done under the pretext of needing help or needing guidance, right? It's like, oh, can you help me with this? Oh, I'm not sure how to do it. I don't know where to start. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, the leader is saying, oh, let me take that for you. Or the employee's coming in and saying, well, I've got so much to do. I can't possibly get to all of this. And instead of the leader trying to problem solve, prioritization, capacity, how much time is involved in the work, all of those sorts of things, the leader just says, fine, I'll take it and I will do it. Helping and supporting is one of the many aspects, obviously, of being a leader. And so we're not saying that you don't help and you don't support, but because the human impulse to help anyone who is struggling, it's just a key part of human nature. We have to recognize that we might be moving into helping and supporting our employees when they don't really need it, right? Because they're presenting it to us as though they need our help, as though they are struggling, and us not really recognizing. And we then take away that opportunity, as I said earlier, for them to really practice and to develop and to move towards mastery. So in these circumstances, when we're allowing for this upward delegation to happen all the time, we aren't helping. What we are doing instead is we are rescuing, we are fostering dependence, we are creating codependent relationships with our employees. And all of these get in the way of our ability and our leaders' abilities to be effective in the organizations. So let's talk about some of the things that happen. Let me give you some more examples around this particular dysfunction of upward delegation. When leaders allow the upward delegation to happen, we see dysfunction emerging within the team almost immediately, right? Because it again, that as the leader gets more bogged down with that upward delegation, they're not able to attend to the other people, or they might not be able to attend to those team leadership type of tasks as well. And the leader gets bogged down in the work of employees, or they get bogged down in complaining and blaming the employee, and they're not building capacity. And so again, most important thing about us engaging engaging in ongoing upward delegation is we are not building the capacity within our organization and within our teams or our people. And essentially what that also means is that we as leaders are not creating boundaries around our time and around our tasks. So we end up not doing what needs to be done. We end up being over involved in things that we really could be delegating to our employees. And then we have implications for it. So I have a client of mine that I've been working with the last few years, and this working towards really boundarying around, my time versus others. Anytime she felt employees were showing any sign of, I'm so busy or I'm feeling overwhelmed, she would immediately, without even any conversation, create this line in her mind of, I can't delegate anything more. Right? And so it became a stopping point around delegation of, I can't possibly give them any more. They're already maxed out. There's too much. And so when we go into it with that sort of fixed belief, which is what this upward delegation, the tolerance of upward delegation puts us up for, is that we don't actually problem solve the actual issue. So what is the issue? What is actually in there? And this is the important thing when we're looking at dysfunction and really trying to dismantle dysfunction in organizations. We can't just react to the symptoms. We have to go in and look at it objectively and without judgment to say, what is the actual issue here? And so if I as a leader are quick to say, okay, that's fine, I'll help it, give it back to me, don't worry about it, I've got it, then we're not actually looking at the organization systemically, we're not looking at our people developmentally, and then we stay in this pattern, right? How many of you have been there? I know I'm guilty of this all the time, right? Where it's like, oh, it's just faster for me to do it. Or, an employee says at the last minute, oh, I don't think I'm going to get this done. And then all of a sudden I'm like cramming to get it finished and trying to break ourselves of that habit, right? Because that's not what effective delegation looks like, but that is where we're again, being permissive and tolerating our employees to pass it back up to us. It's really important. One of the things that I do find though is that there are certain employees that do this, what we call emotional presentation. So they come into the office, they walk around, they present, they talk in such a way where they're emotional and you can feel it, right? I always say it's like I can feel that emotion coming off of them. I used to have an employee who would do this to me and I could swear that I could feel the emotion before she even walked into my office. And I knew what was coming, right? That emotional presentation. And so again, because often with permissive leaders, we're stuck in that place because we lack the skills to figure out how to navigate this. And the employee comes in and I'm so busy and I'm overwhelmed and I don't know how to start and I don't have time for this and all of those things that get presented to us. And then we as leaders, we then shut down, right? We shut down and we say, okay, well, fine. I can't possibly ask you to do this, or I can't possibly not let you off the hook or help you. Again, we go into that rescuer and let me take it back. And I have a client who's actually at a very senior level in an organization, and she actually does that emotional presentation where the first thing she leads with in every conversation is, I'm so busy, I'm so overwhelmed. She always, when she walks around the office, she would look harried and, have things like looking like she was just running from one place to the other. And because of that, because that's the presentation that's being put out, people naturally move away from delegating anything further in those cases. But again, it's not just about the delegation. It's not going in and having that developmental conversation. It's not going in and helping that employee understand what it means when they present in this way, especially at a senior level, and what are some of the strategies that they might want to work with. Are they having difficulties prioritizing? What might help within that, right? And we don't go after the development and we don't go after the actual problem solving of the issue, okay? The last thing that we always want permissive leaders to work on as it relates to upward delegation is really to build your self-awareness around why. Why do you allow it? Why do you tolerate it, right? I know why I did. I wanted my employees to like me. It was really important to me at the time that they like me, that they see me in a particular way, that I get seen as being helpful, and that I not make them struggle. And I think about the fact that, when I look back on it now, how, that actually then created this problem where I simply became the bottleneck in my business because everything and everyone was dependent on me because nobody had gotten to that place developmentally where they could finish it or finish it to the level that it needed to be finished. It always got passed back up to me. So my hours would grow and I would work longer and longer, but then my delegation and my ability to delegate other things would also start to go away. So it's really starting to understand why we allow it, and what are the positive results that we are getting from it that keep us in that place of allowing that upward delegation. So again, it's largely because, again, as permissive leaders, it's about maintaining our image. And I remember, go back to the story I started with the client of ours that was in our Leadership Foundations program and had this big aha about, wow, there's a name for this thing. All of my staff do it. Well, he's hardwired to be helping others. And so his own tolerance for allowing or ensuring people are helping him was not well developed. That having that boundary of how far do I need to go as their leader versus when am I going too far and when am I being taken advantage of by the employee because I'm being permissive and I'm allowing too much upward delegation. And so what he had to work through was that real definition of that, what the delegation is, what the expectation is, and how to get the employee really through whatever developmental gap might be there. But also when the employee comes in and saying, hold on, before you ask me to solve this problem, have you considered some possible solutions? So starting that process again, where it's not dependent upon me, but it's like we're actually working our employees through that development because it's their developmental gap that leads to that upward delegation. It's our developmental gap as leaders that has us working out of that permissive leadership dysfunction and allowing for this level of upward delegation. So we really want to break the habit and break the cycle. So again, permissive leadership, bottom line, it is a developmental gap. It has many, many different ways of presenting itself. We've been talking about it over the last few weeks in these videos. You can check them out. If you haven't had a chance to see them all, hop on over to our YouTube channel, Dranitsaris-Hilliard. And we've got lots of great content out there about permissive leadership and also about the narcissistic leadership dysfunction as well. So you can understand kind of what's driving this behavior, how it's presenting itself. Bottom line in both of these cases, they are self-protective strategies, okay? These are defenses that are used, being the permissive approach in particular, that really is about, protecting how we are feeling, keeping us in our comfort zone as leaders. And so it's the result of a developmental gap. If we don't have the skills, if we haven't developed up our ability to delegate, to exercise authority and feel comfortable about exercising our own authority, we are going to get stuck in this place of being a permissive leader, and that is going to lead to us tolerating upward delegation. Now, again, upward delegation is only one of the behaviors, one of that cause organizational dysfunction, and it needs to be approached as a systemic issue, not just focusing on the behavior of the leader. So I go back to one of the other examples that I brought up earlier, where organizationally we're looking at it and not making it about the leaders that have failed to kind of step up into that gap and take on more responsibility, but what did the role of this group of leaders at this level need to be? What are the systems? How do we put in the structure around it? How do we actually show these leaders and work with them in a more hands-on way until they develop the ability to step into that gap and not just leave things for the leaders to keep deciding, not continuing that dependency on their managers, but really being able to, to start taking on and owning and integrating and breaking that cycle of upward delegation. So it's not just this about a person, it's about the context, and we have to look at it systemically as well. And that, as with all dysfunctions, what we're working towards is clarity of goals, be really, really clear about what's expected, and supportive systems. Like, what are some of those systems? What are some of those ways in which you are going to align behavior, yours and that of your employees, around those expectations and around those goals? Again, from a developmental perspective, we're always working to look at it holistically, not just about the people, but also about the systems in order to get that result, in order to break free from that dysfunction. But it does take, and we know this, right? We all know this from our own experiences, it takes more time and more effort, more energy to shift into that delegation flow, to keep that delegation flow going down. But ultimately, everybody in the organization benefits from it. And as you work to deal with that upward delegation, and that'll be one of your challenges as you think about going back into the workplace and watching for it, being aware of it, and then how do you start to course correct? How do you reverse that flow? You want to get your employees more challenged and engaged in their own work. One of the ways to do that is to really look at this permissive leadership dysfunctional behavior around upward delegation, okay? When we do that, when we're able to reverse the flow, when we're able to get our employees to really keep and work with their work, coming to us for support, for coaching appropriately, but not that upward delegation, we actually end up as leaders with more time to focus on our own work. And again, the company is not paying us to work at a level 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 levels below where we're actually at. So it's really, really important. So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of really key tips, okay? First of all, explore your agenda. Why do you allow upward delegation? What's the story you tell yourself? What are the beliefs that you hold? What is the kind of the fixed belief that you're going in that, again, is your agenda and the reason why you're doing it? Secondly, don't blame the employees, okay? This is not about them. This is not about their behavior. You have to look at this systemically and look at it as from that perspective of the dynamic. There's a role that you play, that we play as leaders in this, in that if we're not comfortable exercising our authority, we will quite quickly and easily accept that upward delegation. And once an employee realizes that they can get away with it, they will continue to do it. Everybody talks about the importance of an open door policy. We also believe in the importance of establishing a closed door policy. Those times where employees really have to be left to struggle to work things through in order to be able to, again, move towards their own growth and development. And allowing and giving employees that not only the time, but the expectation that they find solutions themselves. And we know lots of leaders who practice this where, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. Or at least that's what they say and that's what they espouse, right? But then if you tell the employee that their solution is always wrong, they're going to stop bringing the solutions. So it's, again, using that as a learning moment. It's what are solutions? One of my clients, we had this conversation where it's like, don't ask them to bring back 1, ask them to bring back 2 or 3. Because that really, again, it stretches their thinking and it reduces the likelihood that it's going to be a yes/no response from you, because you listen to the different options they came up with and you can talk about the pros and cons, and maybe there might even be a 3rd or 4th best offer or best option that emerges out of that conversation. But it's building a little bit more of that, sort of strategic thinking or problem solving that we want to develop in the tier below. And then last but not least, really consciously and intentionally reversing the upward flow. One of the things that I know that I've consistently done with my staff, where I start to recognize that they're kind of delegating the final 20, 25, or maybe even 30% up to me, is I actually have a conversation about that, and we look at it and look at changing how much comes back to me. It's like, okay, well, if you're getting 70% done, I want you to take it to 80 now. I want you to take it to, I don't want you to get to this one place and then find your stuck and then just punt it back to me. And so it's that element of reversing that upward flow, but we do it over time. On this next one, maybe do another 5%. And what would that look like? And this is what it would mean. On the one after that, we're stretching it a little bit further. So we actually set goals around that transition that allows us to reverse the upward flow over time. And it keeps us really conscious, not just us as the leader, but also the employee, of going, can I take this a little bit further before I bring it back to my boss? Can I know the next step that my boss always does is X. Why don't I try a first pass at that and get some feedback on how I did, so the next time I can do X plus Y? It's, again, an iterative, it's a developmental process, but we are working to reverse the upward flow. Okay, so with that, your challenge, of course, is to see where you are maybe practicing upward delegation, tolerating upward delegation as part of that, working out of that permissive leadership dysfunction, and starting to put together some plans and some strategies for doing it. If it's not you, but you're noticing others are doing it around you, or if you work in HR and you see that pattern is going in your organization, again, these are simply symptoms of permissive leadership at play. So one of the reasons why we wrote our book, So You Think You Can Lead, was to really help leaders to break free from that permissive leadership dysfunction. all of it caused by a developmental gap. Okay, so with that, I'm going to wrap up. Again, thank you so much for joining me here today. And if you're catching me live or you're catching us on the replay in YouTube, feel free to post your comments, your questions. We look forward to engaging with you around this topic. We have more conversation coming up around permissive leadership dysfunction. Can't wait to be back here sharing it with you. In the meantime, if you're looking for more support, more recommendations and ideas, watch our videos over on our YouTube channel. Again, it's Dranitsaris-Hilliard. We've got some really exciting things coming up in the new year around organizational dysfunction and how do we really dismantle it effectively. And again, if you haven't had a chance yet, pick up a copy of our book, So You Think You Can Lead, and read all about permissive leadership and the symptoms, and more importantly, the developmental action plan to move you from it. With that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining me and look forward to seeing you again soon.